You were listening to All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. Author Tom Perrotta has written about mysterious raptures in The Leftovers, a hard-fought battle for class president in Election, and about a single mom's sexual awakening in Mrs. Fletcher. Now, in his latest novel, he has written about grief and ghosts. The novel is titled Ghost Town. The story follows Jimmy Perini, an 8th grader growing up in Creamwood, New Jersey in the 1970s. When Jimmy's mom dies suddenly at the start of a summer, he feels lost in his grief and left adrift. His dad is working extra shifts. His sister is gone most nights with friends. Left on his own during the summer, Jimmy makes 2 new, older friends. There's Eddie, a lonely stoner who drives Jimmy around in his car while they smoke weed. And then there's Olivia, the high school valedictorian. She suffered a loss of her own and has used a Ouija board to contact her loved one. Now she wants Jimmy to do the same. As Jimmy is exposed to these new experiences, he's also noticing change in all-white Creamwood, New Jersey, change that white residents might not be too happy about. Ghost Town was our May Get Lit with All of It book club selection. Tom Perrotta joined us for a sold-out event in the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. I began my conversation by asking Tom what was the first seed of the idea that became this novel.
You know, during the pandemic, my mom, who was in her late 80s, was starting to have some health problems, and I started to go back quite a bit. I live in Boston, so I would drive home to New Jersey and go and spend a week with her every month. And I was sleeping in my childhood bedroom in the house that I lived in since I was, 8 or 9 years old. And, the presence of the past was just swarming around me. And it was both the memories in that house and the sense of the presence of the town overlaid on its past, and just all those ghosts that were, lurking in the shadows if I walked around at night. So it made me start to think about a ghost story. And then somewhere along the way, somebody mentioned, using Ouija boards as a teenager in the 70s. And I remember I did it once, and it really spooked me. And I somehow or other, this idea of a ghost story that was about the whole variety, the whole plethora of all the ghosts that are around, which are good memories, bad memories, people you missed, people you wish you could have missed.
You dedicate your book to your mom, Sue Perrotta. Could you tell me a good Sue Perrotta story, one that would help us understand her a little better?
Well, what I can tell you about my mom is that she really wanted to be a teacher. And she grew up in an immigrant family in Jersey City, and she was very happily, told us all her life she had perfect attendance in school, never missed a day. And she was a really great student, but she took the secretarial track and ended up going to work right after high school. And I think just that was the great regret of her life. And so when she did have kids, she was adamant, like, my kids are going to college and my kids are, going to be readers. And I could see it again when my own kids were born, and my mother, she just loved talking to them. She loved telling them things about the world. She loved, giving them space to kind of show her what they could do. Yeah. And that made me think, that must have been my childhood.
Jimmy is 13 years old in this book. Why did you make him 13?
Well, to me, that is the age where we start to become ourselves. Like a Freudian might say, okay, in the first 3 years of life, things happen to you and you are formed. It's almost like you don't really get to choose who you are. It's kind of a depressing idea in that sense. You're really trapped by what your parents do or don't do to you. But that wasn't how I experienced growing up. I remember feeling somehow like especially I remember the night before I started high school, just, sweating in my bed, just thinking like, can I do it?
Right.
Am I going to survive high school? Like it seemed like, an open question. But I was sort of strategizing, like, how am I going to make people like me? And at that point I was really defined myself as an athlete. And then, I didn't grow. But I also started, listening to rock and roll in a serious way. And I remember feeling like that I was this person in progress and I had choices to make. And I remember making them, and to me, adolescence is at least, a time where there's an illusion of agency and choosing. And it's one of those, we make ourselves and fiction loves a character who's in process, who's becoming something. I think, Jimmy's a victim of circumstance rather than choosing, though, I think, to some degree. But there's some element of, well, I guess I'll leave that to readers.
We meet Jimmy as an adult. He's now J. Perry, a successful writer. What do you see as the differences between Jimmy and Jay?
I think that Jay can't really understand how Jimmy turned into him. And part of the book is to explain how that happened. Part of it is he belongs to an entirely different social class, right? He grew up in a very working class world, and things happened that led him to leap into a different class, which normally we would consider like, oh, that's the American dream. But I think because of the circumstances that he describes in the book, it's something he's ambivalent about. It's also something that is bewildering to him. And part of the project of Ghost Town is him convincing himself that he's had one life, that Jimmy is Jay, and Jay is Jimmy. But weirdly, to do that, he has to kind of see Jimmy from the outside. And I think the book is kind of works on this interplay between Jay speaking in first person and telling a third person story about this boy, who is him, but who he's seeing from the outside, and I think coming to have a real sense of compassion for.
The book also takes place mostly during the course of one summer. Why did you want to set the book in summertime? What is sort of transformational about summertime?
Well, part of it is summer itself, but part of it is the 1970s summer, because I think Jimmy is sort of, school ends, his father and his sister go to work, and he's just home. He's just cut loose in a sense, and he's just drifting through this familiar world that he feels alienated from because he's grieving for his mom, and he's just lost, really. And I think there is just something about that sense of being adrift and being unsupervised, and being vulnerable, that leaves him so open to a variety of experiences, that are dangerous, that are exciting, that are deeply confusing, but nobody's looking out for him. And I think, if during the school year, obviously there's a structure and there are adults around, but in the summer, in those days, I think he's on his own.
There's a moment in the book where a priest takes him to the beach for a good day. And when you're reading along, you're like, oh no, it's a priest. Take him to the beach. But it turns out fine.
Yeah. It's my version of a horror jump scare.
Really? Why did you put it in? For that reason?
I did. I wanted there to be a kind of, there's a lot of foreboding in the narrative. You know that bad things happen to Jimmy, and you're watching, a summer where it's not really bad things that are happening, weird things that are happening, and I think you're maybe starting to feel a sense of dread of like, well, I've been told that something bad is coming, and then this priest shows up and says, I'll take Jimmy to the beach. And I think, again, in the 70s, if that happened, I think Jimmy might say, well, that's weird. I don't really want to go to the beach with a priest. But I don't think he'd think what we think now. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I think it was, and that was relates to what I was saying before about, the past looking different depending upon where you stand in the present and what you know. So an event like that, which might have seemed odd or charming or it is a good day. That's but as we read it, we keep thinking, oh, when is this day going to go wrong? And it almost does, it seems, but it doesn't.
How did you know you were going to tackle race in this book?
Well, that was kind of at the heart of the story because, I grew up in a town that was all white, and very close to New York, and there were a bunch of towns like that in that part of New Jersey.
I'm aware.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. For so many years, it was just a kind of a fact, but it changed in the late 80s, early 90s, and especially say during the Clinton and Obama administrations, I'd look back and say, well, this is the world I grew up in, and we fixed that. There was just this sense of like that was a definite marker of like positive social change. But then right around the time that I was going back to my mom's during the pandemic, of course, this was the Trump administration, and there were Trump signs, and there was just, to me, this sense of, oh God, there are people who are nostalgic for what I considered, the bad past, the toxic past, and that was just another ghost, another like something that you thought was gone was starting to come back, and it's really important, because when I say I'm writing a ghost story and it's about a variety of ghosts, that's one of them.
Jimmy doesn't fully realize that his mom is dying. He's kind of been shielded from the worst of it, and he doesn't get a chance to say goodbye. He's at his Little League game. How does shock factor into how Jimmy's grieving?
Yes, I think that's really at the heart of Jimmy's dilemma, which is that he didn't, I don't know how a 13-year-old prepares themselves in any way, but I think Jimmy's mother said to him, I'm not going anywhere. And I think she must have believed it and wanted to believe it. It's easy to understand how that would happen. But when she does die, he says it was, my sister remembers it as a long drawn out process. And that when she finally left, it was a blessing because she was in so much pain. But to Jimmy, it came like a sucker punch from the blue sky, because he was in denial perhaps, or was protected to the point where he really didn't know. But what happens is that something is severed, right? This connection between him and his mother is severed. And he spends the whole book, trying to reconstruct that connection, and the Ouija board is part of that. And his mother appears to him a couple times in the book, or he thinks he hears her, which I think is, that makes a lot of sense. Just, you don't have to believe that she's there to believe that, people appear to us as living memories. I think the whole book, he's just wanting to see her again and wanting to hear her again. That's his quest.
Yeah. So he makes friends with Olivia, and Olivia has a Ouija board. Who out here had a Ouija board when you were a kid, right? Were you scared of it? Yes. Why are Ouija boards scary, Tom?
Because something happens when you touch them. Right? I mean, that thing moves, and spirits speak to us.
Are you a person who believes in spirits?
Well, I believe that we don't want to be separated from people we love, and so we, I think there's a great urge to believe in spirits, and I have that urge. I also know that when I played with the Ouija board, I walked home in a state of pure terror because I had this sense that these consciousnesses were floating around behind every tree, and not all of them meant well.
We meet Eddie, his friend. He seems like a classic stoner. We used to have the stoner pad in our high school, right? The stoner patio. What does he see in Eddie that he relates to? Well,
that is a good question, because other kids think Eddie is a creep. Eddie is the
creepmobile.
Older teenager who has a car but doesn't have friends his own age, and likes to pick up younger kids and kind of show off, and get them high. And he's often just trying to pick up every girl he sees. I think what Jimmy sees in him is, let me just put it this way: Jimmy can't connect with his normal friends, the friends his own age who are out having fun, because he's in a dark place.
Yeah.
And he doesn't think what they're doing is funny. The girl that he likes has left him for a guy who Jimmy had thought of as his best friend. He's really cut off from the social world that he considers like his normal life. And there's some darkness with Eddie that I think he connects to. But there's also something mystical about it, because he walks out of a funeral home. He thinks his mother tells him, "You don't have to be here, go out and get some fresh air." Then he's out there and he doesn't know what to do. And Eddie shows up and says, "Get in the car." And he seems to him, in this kind of irrational, magical thinking that you have at a time like that his mother sent him. That Eddie becomes a kind of emissary, and he does feel better in that car. He says later, looking back, I was mostly high in that car, and that helped. But I think there's just a sense that Eddie accepts his darkness and kind of shares it, even though he doesn't really know much about Eddie. There's a sense that they're, vibrating on the same dark wavelength.
You're listening to my conversation with author Tom Perrotta. His novel Ghost Town was our May Get Lit with All of It book club selection. We'll have more with Tom Perrotta after a quick break. This is All of It. You're listening to All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. Let's continue my conversation with author Tom Perrotta from our May Get Lit with All of It book club event. We spent the month reading his novel, Ghost Town. The event was sold out, and as usual, our audience had some great questions for our author. But first, here's more of my conversation with Tom Perrotta. I'll just skip plain out. Do you think Eddie and Leonard were responsible for the tragedy at the end of the book?
I think that Jay thinks so. I think so. I think that part of this book is about somebody finally telling a story, right? Because, I don't want to spoil anything, but I do think there was a kind of traumatic amnesia around it, and now Jay has, in a sustained way, told the story that that he's been avoiding for his whole life. And I think one of the conclusions is that he actually, the official story is wrong, and that he knows the real story.
Let's go to the audience for some questions.
Hello. I'm a fellow, I went to Syracuse, so I'm kind of interested in the legacy of the writing program there. And I know you studied under Tobias Wolff. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the influence that he had on you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Syracuse people here tonight, by the way. So when I was in college, I read Raymond Carver for the first time, and it was a real shock to my system. I was at Yale, and I was reading a lot of, reading Joyce or, whatever, and, loving it. But then it was like, here was this working class American voice, and it was this, in some ways like Stephen King, this language that felt like it was just emerging from the American consciousness, and almost not literary, but on some other hand, like very sophisticated, and I just he became my favorite writer, and I found out that he was teaching at Syracuse, and I said, well, I want to go study with that guy. And what happened was, like, the year I got in, Carver had a fellowship, and he took the year off. And then while he took the year off, he did become ill with the cancer that killed him. So he came back, and I saw him a few times, but I never took a class with him. And the other teacher was, there are two other teachers, Doug Unger, who's a wonderful writer, but also Tobias Wolff, who I had not heard of, but who became like a real touchstone for me. There's something about his voice, which is both very funny and very serious at the same time, that just struck me as a model, basically. I mean, and that's a wonderful thing, to have a teacher who you feel like is actually opening up some space for you. So yeah, I had a really mind expanding time at Syracuse.
Hi. In response to one of Allison's questions, you said, "I think that Jay thinks." And it was just interesting to me as the author, if you had, I don't know, an uncertain sense of your character's thoughts, or if you felt you didn't have full control or agency over his thinking.
Well, I think it's more. I don't like the idea that I get to dictate as me, separate from the narrator of the story. What I think. It's that intentional fallacy that they talk about in college, where it doesn't matter what the writer thinks the book says. It matters what the reader thinks the book says. And so I would prefer not to pronounce a verdict on the work, because I feel like it might shut off some people's experiences, or make them doubt their own interpretations. And that was just me being not wanting to be the arbiter.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Can you talk a little bit about the female characters in the book, specifically Olivia and Denise, the sister? Yeah.
So Denise and Olivia, Denise is Jimmy's sister, and she and Olivia are in the same class, but Olivia is actually 2 years younger. She skipped a couple of grades, as people did sometimes back then, and she's like a 16-year-old valedictorian, and I think she like Eddie is somebody who is acquainted with a certain kind of darkness and feels a little bit alienated from the quote unquote normal kids. And I think, one of the one of the motifs in the book is that, wounded people kind of recognize each other, that there's a kind of a, little society of people who have had experiences that kind of keep them a little bit cut off from the mainstream. Olivia, and Jimmy's dad is having some issues with alcohol. Olivia's mom is an alcoholic. Olivia lost her father and brother in a car accident, and she introduces Jimmy to the Ouija board because she is trying to contact her father. And so Jimmy thinks, we're doing this to contact my mother, but I think Olivia just needed a partner in her quest to reconnect with her dad. Olivia becomes, I've used this phrase before, for lack of a better word, a kind of sexual mentor to Jimmy. And I think in a way, like with the priest, I think we look back from the standpoint of today with a more judgmental view than maybe people would have in the mid-70s. She's 2 years older than him, and she's kind of introducing him to some sexual experiences that he may or may not be ready for. And that is, that's up to, I think up to the reader to try and make sense of, what Olivia's up to and whether she's manipulative or helpful or some mixture of both. Denise, Jimmy's sister, kept living the life that Jimmy was meant to lead. Mm-hmm. She stayed in the hometown and married her high school boyfriend, and her politics are very different from Jay Perry's. Jay's a wealthy, successful writer who's, created a TV show in Hollywood, and Denise is back home in the Creamwood area, working as an administrator in a dentist's office. She and her husband went MAGA right from the start, and Jay and Denise are trying as best they can to figure out how they can be connected across this political divide that does, separate people from their own families. But I think, Denise didn't go to college. Denise stayed home. Those are two things I think that are correlated with MAGA supporters.
This book spoke to me so strongly growing up in New Jersey in the 70s around Jimmy and Olivia's age. I know the same happened for you. What elements of your own childhood in Jersey did you want to make sure were included in this book?
Well, this idea that, just driving around. This is funny, right? It connects to, like, even American Graffiti. It connects to the 50s. It was this, I think it's just a part of our weird culture that just kind of went away. Like, I don't think my kids ever just left the house and wandered around hoping that somebody would pull up and say, "Get in the car."
It's true, right?
That was my idea of a really good night, when somebody pulled up and said, "Get in the car," and like sitting in a car and listening to music, like those were some of the most, profound experiences. I also, sadly, I had friends who would drive around with a case of beer. There were a lot of stupid things that we did, but that was one of them. This idea of, where I talked about the summer with nothing to do, right? Again, my kids were raised, we always knew what camp they were going to be in and what sports they were playing. But for the most part, we were, go out and play. And the place to go and play was this, town recreation program where they had some, old battered knock hockey and a ping pong table with a wilted net. And, you know.
It'd be home before the lights went on, right?
Yeah.
Before the street lights went on. Music's mentioned in your novel, Jethro Tull, Van Morrison. We're about to get to the musical portion of our evening. What does music mean to you? Is it involved in your writing at all?
Well, it's not involved. In fact, I can't write if music is playing, but I write a lot about music, and you know, I think it's something that I think we don't give a lot of credit to, which is just, you know, we live immersed in music in a way that I don't think humans have in the past. I mean, I think music used to be a special thing that would happen at certain times, right? But with me, like if I can be listening to music, I'll be listening to music. Writing is separate. That's a quiet thing. But if I'm in the car, I'm listening to music. If I'm, you know, cooking dinner, I'm listening to music. And I think it, you know, does color our experiences in ways that maybe we're not always aware of. And I'm just sometimes amazed and embarrassed by how many songs are in my head. Like, I know the lyrics to a lot of songs. I'm sure there are people here who know the lyrics to more songs than me, but not too many.
That was my conversation with author Tom Perrotta. His new novel, Ghost Town, was our May Get Lit with All of It book club selection. Up next, a special live performance from our May Get Lit musical guests, They Might Be Giants. Stay with us.